Welcome to episode 50 of the Korea Deconstructed podcast. Can you believe that? We've got to episode 50. I never thought I would make it this far when I started. So thank you for being there. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for everything that you've done. I thought a little bit about who should be the guest for the 50th episodes. I've had some brilliant ones recently. I've had some brilliant ones throughout. And of course, in my own weird way, I came up with the idea of I'll be the guest. I had this fabulous conversation about Korean philosophy with Alex. It was done early one Monday morning in a studio in Seoul. And I thought, let's share that because we haven't done much Korean philosophy and we haven't had me that side of it. So I thought, in my own weird way, that's a nice little break and it makes a marker to go on. There's no real plan for this podcast. I don't have this big idea. I do have some ideas. I'd like to speak to every Korean person. I'd like to get more people. But it's changed and it's mutated along the way from the original ideas, those kind of 40-minute audio only. Now we're doing 3 hours in person with some amazing people. Who knows where it will go next? I don't know, but I'm having fun. I'm learning. And I'm so grateful for the people that share their time to come and spend 3-4 hours with me. Grateful to you for listening, for watching. I've not really done this actually yet for 50 episodes, but here's something. If you're listening to this, if you're watching this, give it a like, give it a share, push it around the internet. Let more people know about Korea Deconstructed podcast. And here's another thing. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you think about the guests. Let us know who should be coming next. Let us know what you think of the conversation. What did I get wrong? It's so hard. I watch or listen to some of them back and I think, I shouldn't have asked that. Why didn't I ask that? It's hard when you're in the middle of it, but I'm doing my best and I think it's getting better. But what do you think? Some of the comments on YouTube recently have been fantastic. I'm really super grateful for those because not only does it let me know that people are listening, it also gives me different windows into the conversation that I wouldn't have thought about otherwise. And I think that's a really cool thing. So we've done 50. Let's try and do however many more and see where it goes. In the meantime, get involved. Let us know where you're listening from. Let us know why you're listening. Let us know what you want to be listening to more of. And let's share this love about Korea because that's why we're doing it. I mean, it's fun to learn about Korea and to find different perspectives of Korea. And that's what we've been doing so far. Let's hope it continues. This is episode 50. It's a weird one. It's short. It's me. So enjoy it. See you soon. Thank you.
Dr. Professor David Tizzard, thank you again for joining.
Oh, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here, and it's nice to see you.
It is great to be here as well, and happy last week, but also I'm keeping up, trying my best to, I'm not a podcast guy, but I am still watching the podcast as we talked about last week.
Oh, yeah.
I am learning a lot. Currently, this past week was able to get a little bit more done on the recent North Korean one with Jacko. I'm not going to say his last name. Zwetsloot. Right.
The next one is even better, in my opinion.
Is it?
Which, with Michael Breen, who talks about being friends with Kim Dae-jung and being here during the 80s demonstrations.
Oh, my goodness.
Meeting Kim Il-sung in Pyongyang. Like, this man lived it all.
That's my fascination. I mean, of course, North Korea, talking about it is fascinating, but I love kind of that transitional history as well. I'm not going to get too much into it because I will sound dumb.
That's why I have a podcast where I listen to other people. That's the beauty of it. But thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Korea Deconstructed, check it out.
All right, we're going to jump into it already and get into it, and I'm going to just do what I do. And as you mentioned, just listen to other people so I don't sound dumb. That's what I'm going to go for.
All right.
Where are we jumping into for this week?
Well, I'll sound dumb for you. I'm good at doing that. It's Monday morning, so why don't we start with philosophy? That seems to be exactly what everybody wants to talk about.
Where is my coffee? I need that to at least get my head going. All right, let's get into it. Philosophy.
There's many different types of philosophy, Alex. So there's epistemology, like how we get knowledge. There's metaphysics, the study of the thing beyond. But is a human's good? A human's bad? If we are good, why is there evil in the world? I mean, these are kind of basic questions that we sometimes think about. We sometimes don't think about. I think today we get so caught up in the personality of political figures and things like this. And we very rarely get down to the actual roots and nuts and bolts of how do we see the world. But this is what philosophy does. Do you ever think about sort of good and evil, right and wrong, these things, or it just doesn't really occur to you?
Absolutely all the time. Although recently it's really just been with myself. I don't know why I haven't had these conversations with my friends. Usually those are late night conversations, but absolutely for me it usually is, I guess it would be motivations for good. What makes us do good and what makes us do evil? Are we following a book? Are we following, is there something intrinsically inside of us that uses empathy? Those are the things I usually think about. What makes us do those good or bad things?
Yeah, and that's brilliant, Alex. And I think that makes you human. And I think many of us do that. But seriously, that is what makes us human.
Yeah.
And that's why we're not dogs. I don't think dogs do that. I love dogs, but I don't think dogs sit around thinking about empathy and their motivations.
No.
That's a genuine thing.
That's absolutely right. Never thought of that.
Exactly why you are human. And, we sometimes miss a lot of that in today's age. But why I want to say that this conversation that we'll have this morning is important, and I hope to unpack more philosophy over the coming months, I think, is because we probably grew up, I'm not sure where you're from, Alex, actually.
From Ohio, Midwest, U.S.
So you're from so you're from the United States. Now, if like me, regardless of your religious affiliation, you still grow up with stories about God and the devil and the Garden of Eden and all of these things, regardless of whether you believe them or not, they're part of the mindset in which we grow up, right?
They definitely do, especially, they at least even get into the secular through movies as well.
Absolutely, they get into the secular, so there's no escaping it, and it shapes our mind, and we are products of those environments. We use those words, we use those images. If we see an apple and a snake and a tree and things like that, our minds are racing, and that's just one example, right? And that extends through all of it. Now, we need to remember that for thousands of years, Korea didn't have these stories. Korea had its own stories. Korea had philosophies. They didn't have Aristotle. They didn't have David Hume, Immanuel Kant, or Hegel, or Descartes. They didn't have any of these people. They had their own people. And these people, the way they saw the world, have shaped the Korean character today. So sometimes we'll look at Korean people and go, well, it's a little bit different here. We need to try to find the strange in the familiar and the familiar in the strange. And thousands of years of thought in Korea have been so different from what we're used to in the West.
Now, do you ascribe that to more of the imagery and what we look at, like the apple and snake is evil to us, or does that change us on a fundamental level beyond just the symbolism that we use to describe it?
To give you one example of this, I'm not sure if I'm exactly answering your question, but do you know that in Korea and East Asia more generally, there's no personification of evil? Like we can think of Satan or the devil or Beelzebub or whatever the names we put on them. Here they have bad luck and they have tokebis or goblins, but they don't have a personification of evil.
Yeah, you come to think of it, when I was young, when I was in Japan, there would be this imagery of what I assumed were devils, but I guess they were kind of more of the dragon dance was one of the ones I just assumed was evil.
But there's no ultimate evil.
There's no ultimate evil.
There's goblins and devil and things like this, and angma and mangtae halaboji, which is like a bogeyman or things like this in Korea. But there's no personification. But we have that, don't we? We have that personification of ultimate good and evil in our cultures.
Absolute Satan.
Yeah. And the goodness as well. But it's not here. And so I want to try to unpack some of these things and give people different frames of reference when we see the world, because that's how, as I said, Korean people have seen the world for millennia.
This is I feel like I'm back in grad school. Like this, I feel like I'm getting a class again. So I'm enjoying. I should be getting my notebook out and writing stuff down. Okay.
There's a test at the end, by the way, so do take notes.
for grad school, I didn't care if I got the A+, as long as I was above a certain level. As long as I get 70 on this test, I think I'll be all right. So where do we start from now?
Well, today we're going to be looking at elements of Confucianism, more specifically Neo-Confucianism. To get there, we need to know that this starts in the Joseon Dynasty. Now, the Joseon Dynasty begins in 1392, and this is when King Yi, he changes the ruling ideology. He's meant to be going off to China, but he turns around and comes back, overthrows the Goryeo dynasty, and removes Buddhism as the ruling ideology and implants Confucianism. I just want to say a word about Buddhism and why this was removed at the time. Now, the main idea of Buddhism is ilcheyusimjo. Now, this is an idea that means everything is in your mind, man. Right? No, seriously.
I can relate to
the
that,
world
right?
is an illusion.
Oh.
Nothing here is real. When you look at the flag and you see the flag blowing in the wind, is it the flag moving? Is it the wind moving? No, it's your mind moving. Buddhists believe that everything was in the mind. Something was either good or bad depending on how we perceive it. Right? So everything's subjective. It's very postmodern. And this was deemed good, but it wasn't deemed effective for building a society. Because if everything was in the mind, why would you build hospitals? Why would you make the world better if it was all just an illusion?
I guess you wouldn't, or you would kind of do what you would have to make what you accept in your mind, or the imagery of the flag coming in. You would have to do something that makes you happier, but would that make me more individualistic and selfish if I'm just worried about what's in my mind?
No, it makes you remove yourself from the real world, because the world that we live in, this tangible world, this desk, that's an illusion.
Okay.
And there's a world somewhere else. So it removes you from this world, and that's Buddhism. And so when Confucianism came in, it was trying to, with the Joseon Dynasty, 1392, and this rules for 500 years. And you've heard Confucianism so many times when you think of Korea. And it introduces a new way of thinking. It introduces principles. It introduces a new world.
Okay, so let's talk about Confucianism, and maybe also as we're doing this, you mentioned Neo-Confucianism as well, so kind of give us a little bit of an understanding of the differences as well.
This is a terrible question to ask you on the radio. How do you understand Confucianism? Like today in 2020, you've heard this word, right?
Absolutely.
And you live and work here in Korea. So it doesn't have to be a grad school answer, but it's just like real talk. What's Confucianism today?
So Confucianism, to me, and I am embarrassed because I did study this in grad school, to me, Confucianism has only been a thing that was used to describe why Koreans do things. And they would always describe it to me as, well, it's because of this conservative-ish background of Confucianism, and that's why Koreans do it. And it became almost overly cliched to the point where it became, when I was, I guess, most unknowledgeable about it, it just became synonymous with, oh, this is why Koreans do it. And I don't agree with that, but that's what just people would say. Oh, they all lined up in a certain way for too long to I don't know, that Confucianism, that explains it.
I think you must have been reading my articles, because the 2 points that you made there, I think, are spot on. One, it's associated with being conservative, and 2, it's something like a deus ex machina that explains everything about Korea.
Yeah.
So if there's BTS's success at the Grammys, there's Confucianism in there. If there's something bad happening in society, it's Confucianism. It's seen as a catch-all to explain everything about Korean society, isn't it?
It takes away a lot of the individualism of the people that we know here in Korea, and just says, oh, it's only because you've been brainwashed isn't the word, but brain trained maybe is the word.
I like that, brain trained. Yeah, I know brain drains. I've never heard brain trained before. Well, listeners, I hope we're training your brains. Confucianism is what we call it in the West. Now, of course, they don't call it Confucianism here. They'll call it yuhak or yugyo. Now, the purpose of Confucianism is ultimately to become a sage, not a monk, not a saint, but a sage. Now, the idea of a sage is somebody who develops themselves through self-cultivation by studying the text. Now, this is very different from Japan, for example, where you have the samurai. In Japan, you had the samurai, which was a warrior class. Here in Korea, on the Korean peninsula with Joseon, we had the sonbi. Now, these were the literati. These were the people who achieved self-cultivation, not physically, but through the mind and through virtue. So the idea in Confucianism is that you should study to solve problems, and you solve problems about yourself. You rectify your own behavior. If your own behavior is good, society will be good. If society is good, the world will be good. What's really important about this, I'll just make this point, is that you do this without gods or deities. There's no praying. There's no asking a transcendental being. There's no asking somebody, hey, help me out. Why have you done this? Confucianism says if there's something wrong in the world, it's because there's something wrong in people and their approach to study.
Okay, so from that, I have a question for you then. Where does that put them on the I don't want to call it leadership board. Are they under the Yangban? They're under royalty? Where do they fit in society at that point? And I know it's a little off topic, but out of curiosity, the intellectuals.
The intellectuals, there was this thing called Sa Nong Gong Sang, and this is the 4 occupations. And the Sa, this is where we get the words Paksa or Wisa, professors and doctors. They were the top, right? And the money people in society were at the bottom. Sa Nong Gong Sang, Nong being the laborers and the farmers, Gong being the people who make stuff, and then Sang, the people that sell stuff. Now, if you look at modern society today in terms of who we idolize,
right,
and, you know, that hierarchy that you're asking about, it's completely flipped.
100%.
100%.
We used to be, you know, very much the smartest. You follow the smart people. Now we say like, well, the people that sold the most products must be the smart ones.
Influencers and people with track on.
I'm embarrassed to ever call myself that.
Are you an influencer? Oh, I feel privileged. That's great.
No, I did the tube, but I wasn't that level.
Okay.
So no. But yes, you're right. We do. I mean, I would agree with you on that. And especially having gone through the system, I've always idolized or at least respected my professors I went through. Okay, we're going to take a quick break right now I got too deep into conversation. Take a small philosophical break to, well, go into some Sonnishi Day. We're going to do some Girls' Generation right now. Back on the air with Professor Tizzard, and we're talking about the good old days when studying and intellectuals, these were put on pedestals, and now we're not there.
But the importance being that those good old days, that period, those centuries influence the way Korean people see the world today, just as unconsciously and through imagery we're affected by the culture and traditions, religious and philosophical, that we grew up in, even if we don't realize it.
Yeah, and a lot of it is the philosophies. The one thing before we go right back into it is a lot of those like phrases that we use in English, American English or British English, kind of come from times of like the plague or whatever. They would be words related to curses or something that were used back then. Yeah. And so everything from the way that we think on the inside to the things we don't think about as we say it were affected by these past. And now we're going to dive more into what affected the modern Koreans, or what is still in that metaphorical bloodline of their philosophy.
Yeah, that's why they go to Hagwons. It's why they study until 11 p.m. at night. It's why, you know, you have that focus on education, and why for a long time there was this not talk about good and evil. There was talk about, you know, person's own morality, right? Which is very different from other parts of the world. Now, in Korea, it's more appropriate technically to talk about Neo-Confucianism. Normally we just call it Confucianism, and just as we might say Christianity, but we mean sort of Protestantism or Catholicism and Seventh-day Adventist, and you get the picture. But here in Korea specifically, it's Neo-Confucianism, and that actually differentiates it from China and Japan. Now, Neo-Confucianism starts adding metaphysical. By metaphysical, I mean abstract. I mean stuff that you can't see. It starts adding those things to the concepts and the conversations around Confucianism. Now, in Neo-Confucianism and in South Korea, for hundreds of years, people didn't argue about what to do with North Korea. There was no North Korea. People didn't argue about whether old people should be allowed to ride the subway for free. They didn't argue about gender representation in society. They argued about the importance of two different things. And the two different things are this. One is called principle, which is li, and the other one is called material force, which is called gi. These kind of, you know, the English translations are not very helpful. I'll try to play them out. But the people that you see on the money, on the bills in South Korea, whether it's the chonwon, right? These were people arguing about for hundreds of years, like, which comes first? Like, principle or material force? What comes first? The idea or doing something? And this is what fascinated, this is what drove the mind of the Korean, the Yangban, the zombie, for centuries.
Now, this will reveal that I don't quite know what you're getting into yet. Is this the chicken or the egg question on this?
Well, that's how we kind of understand. Now, let's talk about this word li, which means principle. Now, this is an idea of something. Now, I can see your furrowed brow, listeners, and it does have a very cute furrowed brow. Now, for example, husband and a wife, right? Mm-hmm. Or husband and husband, wife and wife, we're 2023. I'm all good with that.
Sure.
Yeah. That is a principle. Mm-hmm. We're not talking about a real husband and a wife. We're talking about the principle of a husband and a wife, aren't we? Okay. And we know what that is without talking about an actual person. We can talk about the principle of a president or a king. We can talk about the principle of goodness. Do you get what I mean by this? We're not talking about the actual real manifestation. If we're talking about a husband, a king, a president, a woman, here's another one, a house. Mm-hmm. For example, before we build a house, we need to know what a house is. We need to have a concept of the house. We need to plan the house. This is what we call li, principle. It's the abstract cognition of an idea separate from the reality. So when I say to you, man or woman, we're not thinking about any specific, or dog. We're not thinking about a specific animal. We're thinking about the concept of dog, and that is li, principle.
What it means to be, not necessarily what it means to be man, because I know that means something different now, but what our idea of person is, what our idea of dog is. Although, yeah, as soon as I thought about my dog.
Yeah, okay. No,
but yes, I understand where you're going.
If you were talking to your dog, right, what's your dog's name?
Joey.
You had to think about that. That's weird.
Passed away. That's why. Passed away.
Okay, I'm very sorry.
So I was slowing down because I didn't clarify.
Yeah, okay. Now, if you said to Joey, ball, right?
Yeah.
Joey might know the ball that he plays with, but he might not have a concept of ball in general.
Oh, okay.
And as humans, we do. Mm-hmm. This is called li. This is called principle. Now, I hope that's making a little bit of sense. If it's not, listeners, don't worry. It's Monday morning. It's only philosophy. But this is countered by the idea of gi. Now, gi is material force. So you have an idea of a house. That's li. That's the principle. And then you have the actual manifestation of the house. And there's the house in the real world. You have an idea of a ball. And then you have all the balls that you can see around. The baseballs, the footballs, the soccer ball, and things like this. And Joey's favorite ball that he used to play with.
Absolutely.
So gi is the physical manifestation, whereas principle is the idea. And now these Korean philosophers, the thing that drove the Joseon Dynasty, they were going, what one comes first? What one takes priority? Do we focus on the abstract idea, or do we focus on the physical manifestation?
And did they ever come up with an answer, or just kind of like throughout time, they just fought about it?
Well, no, this is really important because they did, when they say they fought about it, this created factions. I mean, these were the political parties. These were what people argued about, and they were from this school or that school. So in a way, eventually, I'm jumping ahead centuries, it eventually gave rise to things like the Shilhak, which means real study, because it meant, hey, we've got to stop talking about this philosophy and we've got to build stuff again. Do you see what I mean? Because for centuries, they were arguing about which one came first. Now, I'll give you one idea, which is from which is Yolguk. And he emphasized this dialectical nature of principle and force. So which one came first or which one didn't? Now, Yolguk, that was his pen name, real name He described it like this. And get ready to bend your mind, okay?
All right.
Principle and material force are neither two things nor one. Because they are not one, they become two. Because they are not two, they become one. So principle and material force, they're not separate. They're not the same. They're not two, they're not one. Think about the South Korean flag. What's in the middle of the South Korean flag?
The Taeguk.
Yeah.
The circular, to people who don't know, I guess it looks like a yin-yang kind of design.
And that's it. That's what it's talking about. Which one comes first, the red or the blue, right? So they're both there. Heaven and earth are both there. Night and day are both there. So these things act in a dialectical, like means they interact with each other, and one cannot come before the other. So when they were arguing about, and by the way, like you have people like Twege, and they all be arguing about which is more important, principle or material force. But one of the more common answers was that they both came together.
They cannot exist without each other. And is that it?
Yeah, basically, they cannot exist without each other. How can you do this? Now, this is just one answer to it, but I want to make this point because we've been talking about animals and humans, right? Just make this point for 1 minute, which is that as humans, we understand both principle, we understand ideas, and we understand the real world. Now, a chicken, for example, I like chickens. I'm a dakti. I'm born in the year of the chicken. Chickens don't really understand principle, right? I'm going to go out on a limb here. Full respect to chickens. This is not 동물 차별. This is not animal discrimination, but I think certain animals don't understand principle.
I could probably get behind you on that theory.
Okay. So as humans, we adopt a very privileged place in the universe because we transcend both realms. In this Confucian worldview, we understand the heavenly principles, the abstract principles, but we also understand the real world material force. So that puts us above animals.
And more importantly, then, we understand how they work together, how the heavenly forces or the ideas work with the physical world.
Yeah.
World.
And if we get lost in one or the other, we're losing track. And you see how this is different from Buddhism. Buddhism, let's not eat animals. We're all connected. Everything's life force. Confucianism gives humans a privileged place in the universe, which we're meant to enact our humanity. We're meant to enact and bring together these things to transcend the animals.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and organize my notes right now. Can you give me a few minutes?
Absolutely, absolutely. Pop quiz coming.
We'll be back with the professor in just a moment. First up, we're going to do another song. This is BTS with Yet to Come. So there was our song from BTS, which was clearly influenced by Neo-Confucianism, I guess, probably, maybe. Can we say that?
What's really interesting is that BTS, we were always told to read so much Western philosophy in them, like Carl Jung and existentialism. That was the thing that was always associated with them. They would wear hanboks and they would do this kind of pointing towards Korean traditional culture. But philosophically, it was always about ego and idol and Western philosophy, and they weren't digging into Korean philosophy, actually. So it was the form, it was the aesthetic of Korea at some points.
Right.
But the underlying ideas you were meant to see in BTS was always Western.
That's for another class. Wow. So,
I teach that as well. Okay. let me ask you another mind-bending question. I'm sorry, listeners. We're nearly done. Stay with it. There is no quiz. This is the test is life itself, ladies and gentlemen.
The test is out there in the world.
Yes, right. Humans, are we good or bad?
Is this for me or for the listener? Everyone,
it's
right?
It's for everyone. Yeah, it's for myself as well.
Are humans intrinsically good or bad?
Yeah, that's the question.
I would say we are neither, from the beginning, we are neither good or bad. Yet we do develop, we develop as humans. We grow up, we are influenced by our outside forces. And my guess would be that we become good or bad. The problem is then we can't subjectively decide, well, what defines good or bad? I'm assuming, right? Yeah,
it's very good, very good. So we become this tabula rasa, we become this blank slate upon which things are imprinted. Now, you also get this idea, and I'm sorry, listeners, to only sometimes talk about Christianity, but that is the context in which I was raised, or that society. But in there you get the idea that we're born in sin. That we're imperfect beings, and we have to confess our sin before the beautiful and almighty God. We are but imperfect, and we have all this bad stuff in us. Bit different in Asia.
A little bit. Okay, how's it different?
Yeah. Well, you get this idea that really influences Korea. This is from the guy called Mencius. Now, Mencius was the guy that came after Confucius. So just as you would have Socrates and then Plato, you would have Sigmund Freud and then Carl Jung. You would have Big Bang and then BTS. Check out my references. You would have...
We'll get some comments on this one.
Yeah, G-Dragon is the OG gender bender. Let's go. You would then have Confucius and Mencius. Now, Mencius said humans are intrinsically good. He believed that we had these 4 sprouts, these 4 beginnings that give rise to human goodness. And he has this very famous example that if you were sat there and you saw a child about to fall into a well, if that would ever happen, but that's obviously happened a lot in those days, ye olden times, you would reach to save that child. There would be this intrinsic reach in you to stop that child falling in the well. And so you have to have this, it's amazing that they believed that humans were good. This is a brilliant thing. Now, not everybody ascribed to Mencius, but Confucius and Mencius influenced this part of the world so much. Humans are inherently good, and we can cultivate that goodness inside us.
That is something that I don't want to say I forget sometimes, but there are a lot of people in the world who assume humans are intrinsically out to get them, to get theirs, to get their own, to make money, push people down on their way up. So a lot of people think it is a very selfish ego.
Well, that's it. People say human nature is bad, human nature is selfish, human nature is greedy. That's something you hear a lot. And so I think it's worth recognizing this huge idea that Mencius came up with like 2,000 years ago, well before parts of the West, where we said, well, no, maybe humans are good. Maybe we can help each other. Maybe we are born to act in harmony with each other. The Chinese and the Koreans, they had this a long time ago, and that's Mencius. And so you had these four beginnings, right? And these 4 beginnings, they come from compassion, shame, modesty, and moral discrimination. Now, I won't get too long into this, but they're meant to be the li. They're meant to be the beautiful things, the goodness. And we have these 7 feelings in this. This is the 4-7. So the 7 feelings are joy, anger, sorrow, fear, love, dislike, and desire. Now, these 7 feelings, these can sometimes be good. They can sometimes be bad. And they were said to be the gi, the physical manifestation. So sometimes in the world we do good stuff. Sometimes in the world we do bad stuff because we're emotional. But on the basic principle, on the abstract level, we're good.
So we're good. We can be led astray by whatever outside forces or our own emotions. But generally speaking, on the inside, we are a good person.
Yes. Now, this is so important. So listeners, and I'm sure you as well, Alex, but listeners will know that the Joseon society was hierarchical. And most of Korean society today is still hierarchical to a certain degree, although it's changing. Now, how was this social class organized? Now, it was like this. The sage, the elite member of society. This conversation, by the way, listeners, is to do with the relationship between conduct, your behavior, and knowledge, right? So, li and gi, principle and manifest physical reality. Now, the elite member of society, he was an elite person because his behavior was in alignment with the correct principles. He knew what the principles of goodness and righteousness and fairness, he knew what those principles were because he studied them, and then he behaved in accordance with those principles. So the li and gi were in harmony. That's why he was elite.
And so kind of brings it back to what you mentioned earlier, where why are we better than dogs? Because, well, we understand, not necessarily better, but we understand that heaven and earth, the physical, and the idea, but those people are the top of the humans on that hierarchy because they really get it. They understand it completely.
Well, no.
No.
They understand it completely.
And they act on it.
And they act on it.
Okay.
So that's the 2 important. That's how it works. If you know what goodness is and you study these virtues and you study the classics, you study the books, so you know the principles, and then you act on them, then you're an elite member of society. Now, the middle class, they knew the principles. They knew right and wrong, right? They were clever. They knew what right and wrong was. They knew what righteousness was. They knew what fairness was, but they didn't always act on it. There was something in their temperament. There was something in their behavior that meant they failed in their conduct, and that's why they were in the middle. They knew what they had to do, but they didn't always do it. And I'm sure, I'll confess now, I'm like that. Sometimes I'll do something that I know is wrong. And I've got to do, I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway.
You don't have the billionaire mindset. If you did it completely right all the time, you would be top of the
Sigma grind. Yeah, get on it, right? But that's why the middleman is like that, because they know what's right and wrong, but they don't always do it. And that's because of a defect in the behavior, let's say, not because they don't understand the principles. Now, the last part is the lower class man doesn't know the principles. The lower class man, and these would be the slaves or things like this, but these are the people in modern society think about, don't study, don't know what's right and wrong. And so if their behavior is out of line, well, it's because they don't know the principles with which to align to.
Right. And it makes it easier to not only put people in different sections of society, but to kind of justify it, like, well, that's why they're poor. And then you can feel good about being middle class. Be like, well, see, at least we're not them because they don't deserve to be where I am.
Yeah.
And that's how they were. So I see clearly differences between, let's say, East and West cultures, but you see parallels throughout history of how you separate people based on society.
Well, yes, I guess so. And sometimes it's socioeconomic and sometimes it's based on money or things like this. Remember, in Christianity, everybody is equal before God.
True.
Because God is so great, everyone else is just but a poor, humble nothingness. And so it was the greatness of God. Now here, there was no God.
Right.
And so we were defined according to our knowledge of the principles. I just want to make one last point, and this is about the modern world today, which is, do we believe in principles anymore? Are there principles which is like, yes, this is the truth, or is it all postmodernism and it's just your truth and my truth and there's nothing real, absolutely right in the world? It's all just subjective, man. And we've actually gone back to the Buddhism. You see where I started and you see where I ended? Like, this is not progressive. This is retrogressive.
You mentioned that. That was like one of the first things you said. It was it Buddhism was postmodern, and
That's
yet
all in the mind.
postmodern is now or in the future. Well, thank you for taking us on that journey through the philosophical timeline of Korea.
I enjoyed it, even if you didn't.
I
Thank you.
loved it, and I'm still confused, but I understand a lot more than when I started, and I think that's what's important. Thank you so much for joining us. That was Professor David Tizzard.
Thank you very much.